Michael Tellinger, author of Slave Species of God. We're going to be talking about the story of humankind from the cradle of humankind. His book, Slave Species of God, has achieved international status and is changing people's lives while opening their eyes and minds to new realities about how they view the human race forever. In Slave Species of God, Michael Tellinger takes his readers on a remarkable odyssey of the true origins of humankind, in which he draws clear and startling analogies between new discoveries in genetic engineering and ancient archaeological finds. He highlights emerging scientific information overlooked in the past, and he unravels the Bible's often obscure stories by linking these to their original form in Sumerian clay tablets and other prehistoric writings. He provides explicit answers to why our human world has become so senseless and chaotic by revealing the very secrets of our prehistory. His book shatters myths about evolution and God, and in Slave Species of God, he enables evolutionists and creationists to finally coexist in one pond, as he puts it. The arguments are compelling, simple, and refreshing, retracing the path of human evolution from the murky, distant past to the religious dogma that haunts humankind today. The question of who we are and where we come from takes on a new meaning as we discover that our DNA may have in fact been manipulated by our Creator some 250,000 years ago to produce a less intelligent primitive species. In his book, he provides evidence that shows that Adam and Eve were not the, quote, apple of God's eye, as first suggested in the book of Genesis. Michael presents that many arguments and evidence convincingly point out the difference between God in capital letters and God in lowercase. How did this genetic manipulation affect humankind? How have we evolved in 250,000 years? Can we achieve immortality? These are just a few of the questions we're going to be talking about this next hour with my guest. Welcome, Michael.
Hello, Hillary. Nice to be on your show.
Well, thank you. I've been waiting quite a while to have you on. Now, let's just kind of start with a brief background of, what is your background and where do you come from, and how did you get into this big topic?
Thanks very much for asking that question. Very few people actually do. And it's an interesting question because it's not something that many authors think about. Well, I certainly didn't until somebody asked me that question not so long ago. And you have to really dig deep to try and retrace when your personal interest in, origins of humankind was first sparked. And with me, strangely enough, it goes back many, many years ago to when I was very young, even as young as about 5 years old. And that really surprised me because I remember, I come from a musical family. I grew up in a family where my mother sang opera. I used to go to classical performances as a small child and so forth. And from an early age, I was playing music and writing and composing music. And when I was 5 years old, I wrote a song that dealt with the very strange concept for a 5-year-old. It talks about people dying, and when they die, they go to heaven. But in heaven, they don't serve bread made of flour and water like we see it. They serve bread from an organic substance that we don't have on planet Earth. So that's how far back my sort of interest with human origins goes to when I was very young, having strange thoughts about it.
And where did you pursue academically? What did you pursue because of these early experiences?
I went, after school, I went to university in Johannesburg, the University of the Witwatersrand, which is famous for for Professor Philip Tobias, that was involved with the cradle of humankind and the Taung skull and all those major discoveries here in South Africa in the 30s. And I studied pharmaceutics. I spent 5 years at medical school. And I realized then that something wasn't quite right. There was something wrong with this whole Darwinian evolutionist theory that we've been sold as fact. And And, that really was, and then the reading, I suppose many people like me, when I read my first year at university, I read Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods, who incidentally didn't have much scientific support. Erich von Däniken just used common sense and logic to piece this whole story together. And it was just absolutely amazing to see when all you have to do is use common sense and logic and start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and you realize that things are not the way we've been taught.
Michael, did you find that when you reached this point in your life where you were questioning the origin of where we come from as a species, that you had to undo your traditional education?
To a certain extent, I suppose I did. But being a very, inquiring mind, I just allow myself to go wherever the evidence leads. And wherever the evidence goes, and I find the clues, then I formulate my theories and my opinions based on the clues and the evidence. And it's really that simple. And you find, well, certainly I find that when you see what's happening in the academic world at the universities, where we should be getting, breakthrough knowledge and information from, and I'm speaking broadly now, I'm generalizing to a certain extent, but this is really more generally the case, where at universities where we should be getting all this major new breakthrough information from, we're getting the opposite. They've become the bastions of dogma and closing in with new discoveries and laughing and scoffing at independent scientists and researchers that are out in the field on their own when they come up with new discoveries and theories. And, well, which university do you belong to? If you don't belong to a university, you can't make new discoveries, kind of thing, And that's just absolute utter nonsense.
Yeah, after reviewing your material for the show, it seemed to me that it was kind of a common sense thing. Once you get through all of your training and you realize, that something's not quite right, you almost have to kind of go back and retrace your footsteps. So what do we really know about our human origins, Michael?
Very, very little. If you're going to stick to the textbooks and you're going to, spew forth and regurgitate what you read in your history books and your textbooks that you find at school and university, you're going to be going down a dead end. Unfortunately, that's what it is. And I can categorically state now, and there are many, many people that will resonate with this, is that everything we've been taught at school is a lie. And what rings really, really true in my ears is going back many years to when David Icke first started promoting his new theory on humanity and all the conspiracies that are going on, and the dumbing down of humanity. When David Icke called the education system the system that turned us into left-brain prisoners, and no truer word has been spoken. That is so true, because as you said a few minutes ago, is unfortunately what happens in our education system is that by the time we leave school, we've been so manipulated, so indoctrinated with lies and disinformation that it takes a lifetime, in many people's lives, it takes a lifetime to undo all that conditioning and all the lies we've been taught.
So where did humankind suddenly appear from around 250,000 years ago? When you talk about this in your book, why don't we share with the listeners now, where do you think they came from?
All right. Well, many researchers, especially geneticists, have come out over the last decade stating very categorically that our DNA is not of this planet. It's not of this earth. It comes from somewhere else. It comes from outer space. New research is showing clearly that consciousness is the thing that forms life, that creates life. It seems that our species just suddenly emerged around 280,000 to 300,000 years ago on planet Earth, and that's genetically, variable, verifiable, and that's where we suddenly appear as a species, as a complete intelligent species on planet Earth. What those early people looked like is still somewhat of a mystery, but they probably only had 22 pairs of chromosomes and not 23 pairs of chromosomes, and they could not procreate. Many ancient civilizations talk about the ancient times when the early civilizations were on Earth and they could not procreate. Every ancient civilization has the story of the sky gods coming down from the sky and creating humankind, and all of it revolves around gold. Gold is a common denominator in all of this. that you find even in the Bible, in the book of Genesis 2. God says to Adam, I want to take you to the land of Havilah, where there is water, there is good land, and there is gold. And now why would God be so obsessed with gold when he's just created this new species called man? And Eve does not even exist at this point in time. But what's fascinating, Hillary, is that many very smart people, researchers, academics, historians, archaeologists have written about this origin of humankind that lived at the southern tip of Africa, that were a primitive species, that were controlled and manipulated by an advanced group of beings. Some of them call them ABs, like Professor Paul von Ward from Harvard University, who recently made contact with me and sent me a copy of his book. And so there's been a lot of writing about this early human civilization that suddenly emerged at the southern tip of Africa, but there has never really been any physical evidence about this or for this. Now, what is so fantastic about the work that I'm involved in right now is the discovery that we made here of this ancient civilization, this first ancient city on Earth that we can date back to at least 280,000 years ago. That was here a mysterious civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa, mining gold. We've got millions of stone structures that they left behind, ancient roads, ancient terraces linking them all together. And this is the physical proof that many of these researchers have been writing about but never had the physical evidence for it. We have now been able to provide it so we can fill a huge part of the missing link.
Speaking of missing link, most people, speculate on finding the missing link between chimpanzees and human species, current form of human species. Are we wasting our time searching for that, or is it just a distraction to keep us off the truth?
I think both of the above. We're wasting our time, and it is a distraction. Clearly there is no progression, evolutionary progression, that shows that we evolved out of a primitive ape-like creature. We emerge as a complete advanced human being called Homo sapien 280,000 years ago, more or less, or 300,000 years ago. That's what happens. We suddenly pop out of nowhere. Bang. Now, what's fascinating is that the latest research in science shows how consciousness is the stuff that actually creates life throughout the universe, and the energy that we call consciousness, that is the stuff and the fiber and the fabric of the universe, is actually the creative force. You can call it the creative force of God, if you want to call it that. But that is the stuff that actually creates life. And we find that in absolutely secluded and hermetically sealed chambers with many experiments, and life suddenly emerges out of nowhere, spontaneous life. What is fascinating about that is that this early civilization here in South Africa that I've been researching and walking through these ruins on the mountains and the terraces, they built these strange hexagonal kind of chambers that are clustered together like hexagonal, like they look very similar to beehives. And we believe that it is in those hexagonal shapes, not only because they're clustered together, but because of their shapes, that those are actually the cloning tanks and the cloning chambers for these early humans. And the reason I say this is because the number of stone ruins that we find, there's over 10 million of them, and there's probably closer to 15 or 20 million of them if we had to add them all and do a proper, more thorough count. But even if you stop at 10 million stone ruins in South Africa and Zimbabwe 200,000 years ago, I mean, that must send shivers up any conventional historian's spine, because that's not what our history books tell us. We're told that this was a sparsely populated continent. There was nobody living here. There were a few wild men living in caves, making stupid stone tools, making fire out of flint and etc. That is not the case. There was a very advanced civilization that lived here that knew exactly what they were doing when it came to mining gold. And what is interesting is that these hexagonal, weird kind of chambers, must have been these cloning chambers, because to go from 0 to 50 million or 100 million people, you can't just breed those people with these so-called birth goddesses or birth mothers, as all the ancient civilizations talk about. And that's what the Sumerian tablets talk about as well, where they talk about the first birth goddesses that were impregnated with the fertilized egg to produce the Lulu Amelu, a primitive worker. We suddenly have what I believe is the modus operandi of how they actually produced so many people in such a short space of time. And, we shouldn't be surprised. We see it in sci-fi movies, how they clone people in underground chambers, and they are born fully grown as adults so they can go straight to work.
Well, we have genetic engineering now and manipulation, so it really isn't too much of a surprise. I think what people will hear from what you're saying is the disbelief that it could have been so possible, at this time frame. However, that's where, deprogramming our conditioned sense of history comes into play. If you deprogram your conditioned sense of history, and it's interesting because when you were talking about consciousness being the life force behind all of this, consciousness can only go back and access what it's aware of. So if we're only aware of what we're told happened in the past, then that will be where our consciousness travels to. If we unravel the history and we find pathways back to places where you're researching and discovering, it will be an interesting thing to look at, on the sense that once you make that connection on a level of consciousness back to your original roots, then all of a sudden I would imagine that on a DNA level, it would open up sources of memory within the brain as well that would allow you to access memories all the way back to then on a level of consciousness. And I think that's where we've kind of put a block down so that we don't access these for one reason or another. So you keep mentioning... That's my 2 cents on it anyway. Well, you keep mentioning the obsession with gold. And I want to know, what do you think this was? Why is gold such an important piece of this puzzle?
Well, there are probably a number of reasons for that. The first reason that is always thrown out is what the Sumerian tablets refer to as the Anunnaki needing gold for protecting their planet against environmental disaster and global warming and the damaging rays from the cosmic rays and so forth. I suppose pretty much what we undergoing right now on planet Earth, and trying to find ways of protecting us against harmful ultraviolet and X-rays and cosmic rays and so forth. And so that's only the first thing that gets thrown out. But and it's possibly and probably the first thing that caused the obsession with the arrival on planet Earth in search of this substance called gold. But then there's a whole other thing, the whole monoatomic principle of gold and the use of gold in its alternative forms and states, where it does not bind together in 2 atoms together, where the Cooper bonds start to play an important role, but they actually exist in a monoatomic kind of state that many scientists have been doing a lot of research. So Lawrence Gardner has written on that. The Alpha Institute in Switzerland has done a lot of research on that, and we find that I'm sure many of your listeners would have heard of David Hudson, who's an American who did a lot of work on that in the early 80s, and God bless the Russians, because they seem to come to the rescue whenever the American institutes can't provide the answers. We run off to the Russians, and they seem to help with some remarkable new discoveries. So gold is a phenomenal thing. It features in all ancient civilizations. You cannot separate it from human origins. It is what I call one of the 3 common denominators in all of human history: gold, slavery, and the winged or feathered serpent. And that are the 3 common denominators. And the monoatomic form of gold, or white powder of gold as it's often called, is a very powerful substance. It has very incredible properties that we are still coming to terms with grappling with. I'm sure the Black Ops guys and the secret organizations are working with it on a daily basis, so they'll know a lot more about it, but the guys on the street know absolutely nothing about it. It's an inexhaustible source of energy, and that, I think, would have been another major reason why gold was so sought after. A source of energy for the body and source of energy to use as an external energy. It radiates a very specific frequency of white light that is very healing to our DNA and healing to our body and our cells. It vibrates at a specific frequency, and what the latest indicators are that in that form of, in this white powder where it defies laws of gravity, it floats. It actually seems to appear and disappear all the time, but it happens so quickly that we can't see that process happening. It seems to be moving from space-time, where we live, into time-space and back all the time. And that is an interesting study that many researchers have been talking about recently. And, obviously manna from heaven was white powder of gold that Moses fed to the Israelites in the desert. And that's why you understand why they stayed healthy for 40 years. Because you can imagine 40 years in the desert without water and sanitation. They weren't a clean bunch of people. And they probably weren't very healthy either. So this white powder of gold would have helped them a great deal.
So you talk about this extraterrestrial species coming to the planet, and the reason they come here is to harvest gold from the planet. And you talk about the concept of slavery and the genetic manipulation. Do you believe that we were, in a sense, created to assist in the process?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. And that's what these discoveries down here prove absolutely without a shadow of doubt. If you could come here, step out of the telephone, I would take you up the mountains and through the valleys and show you thousands and thousands of ancient stone ruins, stone structures that are all linked together, that by terraces and ancient roads that were all constructed for one reason only, and that's to mine gold. We have thousands of gold mines that are scattered among these ancient ruins. Many of them have collapsed and been closed in, but there are some that have somehow survived, and some that have been re-excavated in the gold rush in the mid-1800s here, just like it happened in America and in Australia. That we had the same kind of gold rush here. And basically what those guys came, those explorers just came and reopened these ancient mines. And guess what? Very quickly you find out their modus operandi. They realize that wherever there's a stone circle, there's an ancient stone circular ruin, there's a gold mine nearby. And that's what you find. You find gold mines that are scattered throughout all these stone circular ruins.
So are you talking also about Stonehenge and other places around the world that are more famous for their whereabouts?
No, Stonehenge is different. I'm specifically talking about the ruins of Southern Africa.
Okay.
I think that I recently found, and in that I include all of South Africa, all of Zimbabwe, which includes Great Zimbabwe, by the way, as well as those spectacular ruins that people know as Great Zimbabwe. That was probably the head office, the headquarters of this whole mining operation here. And this, the house or the home of the Sumerian entity Enki. Strangely enough, I just took out a spiritual group the other day, and they had a channeling after going to Adam's calendar, which is a discovery that we made in 2003, the oldest stone calendar on Earth. We dated back to about 280,000 years at the point of the sudden appearance of humankind. And after taking them to Adam's calendar, which incidentally still works today, the calendar still works and is accurate today, which is spectacular. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And they had a channeling afterwards, and they channeled Enki himself. And that's not the first time. It's happened several times. And I was present in one of those channeling sessions, which was my first channeling session, incidentally. And so we could ask questions of Enki himself, and everything that I've been writing about, everything I've been discovering was confirmed to be true. And this has now happened several times with different psychics, with different channelers, and the same bit of information keeps coming through consistently.
Now, you call these people the first people in your book, Temples of the African Gods. And you talk about how this civilization existed about 200,000 years before the Egyptians. So with the Great Pyramids, do you believe that they were part of the Egyptian culture, or do you believe that they were built by these first people?
The reason we know that there's a direct link is because part of these ancient stone ruins in South Africa, we have discovered pyramids. The Adam's calendar structure is linked to 3 pyramids that are aligned to the rise of Orion's belt, and also 2 large pyramids and the third smaller one. And those pyramids are as old as the structure itself. So I guess around 280,000 years old. They're completely covered by soil because we have evidence and a lot of geological support to show that the flood actually came through here, which I believe was the main reason for the destruction of the civilization around 12,000 BC, around that period. And the pyramids are probably covered by 30 or 40 meters of sediment and soil, but they are perfectly aligned with Adam's calendar and are at the furthest extent of a golden mean spiral, Fibonacci spiral, that you draw from Adam's calendar, and it ends up exactly between the 2 pyramids. And then when you take and extend a line north of the 2 pyramids and you go exactly north, guess where the line runs through? And that's incidentally on 31 degrees east, okay? And I'll explain to you now the relevance of that. If you extend the line north along 31 degrees east from Adam's pyramids, they run straight to the middle of Great Zimbabwe, and they run straight to the middle of the Great Pyramid of Giza on the 31 degrees east longitudinal line. Now, incidentally, the gods of the Bible, the Elohim, who I believe were the Anunnaki and those that came to earth and created humankind, they have got nothing to do with God with a big G, the universal divine creative force and creative energy. We shouldn't confuse those two. Let's just make that very clear for people. We're dealing with just an advanced group of beings that manipulated a new species out of genetic cloning. And their name, the Elohim, also remember that Elohim is a plural. It's not a singular word for God. So Elohim, every time you read the word God in the Bible, you've got it translated into its original form, which says God, this plural gods. So now the original Greek word for Elohim, its numeric value is 31. And all these structures are built on the 31 degrees east longitudinal line. Do you think they were trying to tell us something?
Yeah. Why do all mythologies have the same group of gods? If you go back into people like Zecharia Sitchin's work and you follow some of the other people who have looked into this in depth too, why do you think all mythologies really across the board have the same group of gods? They just have different names. Why is that?
Yeah, the answer to that is really very simple. And you've got to maybe be very bold and very brave to say that. The answer is very simple. They were the same group of gods, the same group of advanced beings that had means to travel in airships and spaceships and anti-gravity devices throughout planet Earth, across planet Earth, set up settlements all over the place, had very advanced technology that I now believe, and if you went through Temples of the African Gods, I'm sure you would have seen the conclusions that I reach about the energy forces that they used. They seem to have understood the whole concept of vibrational energy and vibrational frequency, which is the substance, which is the reason why the whole universe exists. The universe exists, the entire electromagnetic universe as we know it and as we see it from our little planet exists for one reason only, because it vibrates and it spins. If it stopped vibrating and stopped spinning, all the matter in the universe would just instantaneously disappear, and all we would be left with is just this invisible, untouchable field of energy that is the field that lies underneath that creates all this physical stuff in the universe that we can see and touch. So these ancient people here had a keen understanding of this energy that is based on frequency and vibrational frequency. And you can see that very clearly when you start analyzing the ruins. That is a really amazing moment to reach in this process of discovery. Absolutely. A big aha moment for me.
I think for anybody researching this or looking into it, it's a big aha moment for us as a species. Now, so where do you think they came from? Do you have any theories on where these people came from? I mean, if you look today at what our culture is doing, where we go to Mars and we explore it with, probes and all different kinds of things, the concept is really not that far out there. And if they had another form of energy, we would be able to explore other planets and go further and deeper into space. So why would it be so odd if another civilization that developed in some other place was able to do the same thing before us? Where do you think they come from? And that's the first part of my question. The second part of my question is, why is the flying serpent the creator god in all the mythologies? We see a consistent theme of flying serpents through all cultures.
Yeah, very, very, very good questions. Thanks, Hilary. I'm just making a note here of your question because I'm going to forget halfway through answering you. So the first part of the question, where do they come from? The most common answer to that is, first of all, we've got to realize that this planet has not been settled and visited by only one group of beings, advanced beings from space and from the universe. This planet has been visited by multiple advanced beings from many, many star systems and many planets. So we've got to first come to terms with that. Secondly, then let's come back to the guys that created us, that behaved slightly, I believe, maliciously. They weren't supposed to do that because there seems to be this galactic and cosmic law that the guys in Star Trek, incidentally, figured out already 40 years ago, however old Star Trek is, the whole prime directive, where you may not interfere with other species and other cultures when you encounter them on your mission through space. So these guys broke the prime directive, and they decided that to help them mine gold, they're going to create a primitive species. Now, who are these guys? These guys, according to the Bible and many other ancient civilizations, were the sky gods, and we've got descriptions of them in many, many cultures. In the Zulu tradition, and I want to specifically talk about the Zulu, the ancient African culture, they called the Abelungu, the white sky gods. And that resonates with many other ancient cultures. The whole Aryan thing is very, very real, and we've got to stop shying away from it because it's politically sensitive. We've got to deal with these issues and, put race aside. It's not a racial debate. This is a debate about history and human origins. And we've got to put our little prejudices aside and deal with these issues. So this whole Aryan thing is very, very real because it seems like these white sky gods that the ancient Zulus called the Abelungu came down and created the people. And the African people who were black, who actually, they weren't black, they were red. And if you ask the Bushmen, the ancient Bushman tribes here, and you ask them, who are you? They don't call themselves the black people or the yellow people. They call themselves the red people. And that's very interesting. That's exactly what the Sumerian tablets tell us. And other ancient cultures, the Vedic cultures tell us the same. The Native American cultures tell us the same things about the blonde gods and the white gods that created the people. And then those beings are then in the Sumerian tablets described as the Anunnaki, who were fair-skinned, light-skinned, fair-haired, blonde-haired, blue eyes. In fact, Sumerian entity Enki is described on many occasions exactly in those terms. So it really starts to fall into place when you start looking at that. You've got to follow those clues. And so, first of all, where did they come from? Well, the Sumerian tablets tell us they come from a planet called Nibiru. And this eternal search for planet Nibiru is going on, and people ask me all the time, when is Nibiru coming back? Well, that's almost an impossible question to answer. But I'm sure NASA will have the answers for it because they got the Southern Pole Telescope, and I believe that the prime reason for them setting it up there is to see the planets that are not orbiting the sun in the plane that all the other planets are, that are on different kind of orbits, erratic orbits, to be able to pick those up. And Nibiru is supposed to make its appearance from the southern skies. So, that could answer the question. But it gets even more interesting because all ancient cultures were very, very familiar with many star systems. we talk about Sirius, we talk about the Pleiades, we talk about Draco, we talk about Orion's Belt. Those are the main star systems that all ancient civilizations were obsessed with. And once again, the civilization that we've just uncovered here, once again, Adam's calendar aligns to the rise of Orion's Belt. Okay? Guess what we find? We find pyramids aligned to the rise of Orion's Belt. Then there's a stone chair that is carved that the ancient Sangomas and shaman here describe as a very important place where rituals took place of inaugurating ancient kings. And it points towards what? It points towards Tuban, the same star that the Great Pyramid, the north shaft of the Great Pyramid points towards. It also, incidentally, swings between the Pole Star and Tuban. And so it goes. So there are some authors and some psychics that have written about the planet Nibiru actually originally being part of the Sirius group of planets. And that is a very interesting thing. And over a long period of time and some turbulence, has actually migrated and was then caught up in, somehow got entangled in our sun, in our solar system. And sorry, then your next question, Harry, was the flying serpent. Why is a flying serpent? Well, the symbol of the flying serpent is a lot more mysterious than people think, and it's got nothing to do with the serpent, but it was sort of symbolism is very important in all ancient civilizations, and there's some fantastic work that you can find on the importance of symbols and how many thousands of symbols we have had over civilizations and the absolute importance they play in all ancient cultures. Deep spiritual importance that they carried. This is not just like writing the alphabet and, it means absolutely nothing to us. The ancient symbols were very, very important spiritual tools of knowledge and consciousness and all those kind of things. But the flying serpent represents many things. It represents frequency, it represents DNA, it represents water, it represents consciousness and the manipulation of consciousness. It represents the knowledge of alchemy and using the knowledge of alchemy and the frequency of matter to manipulate it, to convert it from one state to another, or even convert it from one metal to another. So the whole winged serpent thing is not only tells us that we're dealing with very advanced knowledge and information of these ancient civilizations, but it's a symbol for probably all of the above that I just mentioned. And all ancient civilizations have a winged or a feathered serpent somewhere in their creation story or creation myth.
So why do we as humans use, I'm going to switch gears here for a second because I think it's a relevant discussion. Why do we use less than 3% of our DNA, less than any other species on the planet?
Well, that's because we were manipulated. There's a very interesting thing as well when it comes to our DNA. If you look at how much of the DNA a fruit fly uses, it almost uses 100% of its DNA. You'd imagine an advanced species that lands probes on Mars and on the Moon and into deep space, we should be using a little bit more than that, more than 3%. But that's what it comes down to. And that's clear evidence that somebody messed with our DNA. And that's what many of the geneticists will throw out as a compelling argument for the fact that something is not quite right. We should be using larger parts of our DNA. But at the same time, Hillary, the whole DNA thing is taken on a completely different slant. Because for many decades now, we've been stuck in the DNA mode and thinking of DNA as this molecule, this biological piece of string in our body, in our cells, that is a program code for our body and our, the physical part of our body. But that's not all it is. The latest research, it's not that late and that recent anymore. It's the last few years already that this information has been available, but it's slowly trickling through. Is that our DNA is actually a very, very advanced receptor and transmitter of knowledge and information, of light, of all kinds of frequencies. remember that our eyes only see a very, very small fraction of all the frequencies in the universe. There's an infinite amount of frequencies out there, pretty much. But our DNA has the capacity to actually absorb and transmit frequencies of a huge, diverse number of frequencies. And in those frequencies comes information that helps to speed up the evolution of our DNA and of us as a species. And this seems to come in the light that is emanated from the center of the galaxy, in this light that we now call the source of consciousness, if you want to call it that. And that is the source that speeds up the growth of consciousness and speeds up the genetic evolutionary process in our cells, in our nucleus of our cells, and specifically in our genes. Now, the Russians recently did an experiment with the chromosomes in humans, and they found something so amazing, and this is when they discovered it. They found that because of the chromosomes absorb and transmit this energy and this information, when they take out a chromosome from its place in the human cell, in the nucleus, the effect of that chromosome and its radiation and its energy field around it is so strong that the cell behaves as if the chromosome is still there for another month, for another 30 days or so. It still believes that the chromosome is there. That's how strong that energy field around the chromosomes in your nucleus, in every cell of your body is. And that is because of this absorption of all these frequencies and this information through energy transfer.
So do you think that we were programmed to use 3% of our DNA to dumb us down, so to speak? Why do you think that they would have done that to us as a species?
Definitely to dumb us down. I don't think the 3% was calculated and predetermined. That's just what it is. That's just where it sits right now. But certainly when they cloned the species, once again, read the, many people have had terrible things to say about Zachariah Sitchin and etc. Let me tell you what, that man deserves the greatest honorary medal from the human race that anyone can get, because he's done so much groundwork for everyone, especially people like me who can now relate to what he's discovered and actually find the physical proof of what he talks about. And the 3% is just something that happened. I don't think that was predetermined. But the Sumerian tablets, clearly translations that Sitchin puts on the table, clearly tell us that these guys, predetermined to say we will give them so much of this and so much of that, but we'll retain the part of the essence that gives them too much knowledge, and the tree of life, we won't give them this of the tree of life and that of the tree of life, and so forth. So clearly they were planning to dumb us down, to dumb us down so we would take orders, be smart enough to take orders and instructions, but dumb enough to just follow orders and not ask too many questions. But I must also say that when the encounters I've had through the spiritual contact and the channeling contact we've had with information about these ancient settlements and these ancient civilizations here, was that the entity Enki feels very passionate about this ancient civilization, and I get a very deep sense of that myself. He talks about it as his beloved city, his beloved ancient city that he built in concentric circles and so forth. He speaks about this ancient settlement here in southern Africa with great affection. And I find that very interesting, and that seems to be the case, because there wasn't, although it was slavery, it wasn't slavery, and it was absolute slavery. You've got to understand this. Absolute slavery. There was democracy and those kind of things weren't even, they just didn't exist. So, but it wasn't forceful or brutal slavery. There weren't whips on the back and, you must work 12 hours a day and get no food and a snippet of bread. That's not the case at all. And we know this because of the thousands and thousands of kilometers of agricultural terraces. These people had everything they could ever wish for. They were fed, they were looked after, they had energy, they had levitation, they had advanced tools that they used. They didn't know where the tools come from, who makes them, how they work, why they work. They just knew they worked and they used them. It's just like the miners, what do you think the guys that work in gold mines today, with all the advanced technology they use underground, do you think they know where those tools come from, who makes them, why they work, how they work, who the hell designed it? No, they just use the tools and get on with the job, Same thing here.
So where did they go? I mean, they came, they did what they had to do, and they left?
No, they didn't leave. They're still here. The Anunnaki is still here. Unfortunately, the flood came about 12,000 BC or 11,000 BC, around there. That number is still relatively vague, but it's in that area. And the flood came through here. We've got plenty of evidence of the flood. We found sea fossils, fish fossils, seashells, sea sand on top of mountains. And I'm talking about the Drakensberg now, right? I'm not the top of the Drakensberg, but the Drakensberg part of the mountains that I live in, here in Watervalboven, where we have all these ancient structures that are so beautifully compacted together. They're covered by soil, so the flood came through here and destroyed that civilization. And once again, if you follow the Sumerian tablets, they tell us that the flood originated from Antarctica, from the southern pole, and it moved across planet Earth in a wave, like a rubber band moving across planet Earth to the North Pole and then bounces back. And that probably happened not just once, but a few times, until the momentum worked itself out and the water settled down. But we can see the evidence of the Great Flood here, and then that destroyed this entire civilization and just wiped it out. And then what we see rebuilt today is just a small fraction of what existed before. So we only see small areas that have been rebuilt, and we can actually take people to, and we can study and look at without having to dig and do archaeological digs.
So when you say they're still here, do you mean they're here presence-wise in a physical sense, or in a more esoteric sense?
No, Anunnaki, my guess is they're still here very much in a physical sense. Well, let me rephrase that. I think the Anunnaki remnants, the offspring of the Anunnaki, those that sort of mixed with when the sons of God saw the daughters of man and they had children with them, Genesis 6. Those are the guys. The Anunnaki remnants, I think, are definitely still on planet Earth. They never left, and I believe that they're probably behind the major control groups and the elite power groups that control the planet with all the industry, the mining, and all that.
And all that stuff. We have about 5 minutes left in the show. Michael, and what I'd like to ask you is, when we begin as people to re-grasp our origins and our roots, what do you think actually will enable us to awaken those sleeping parts of DNA that we have and enable us to become more fully evolved human beings?
I think the best clues for that are the scientific research that results that we're finding today with all these energy fields that have been detected and identified that emanate from the center of our galaxy. This light, these strange energy fields that seem to influence our DNA and energize our DNA and this and speed up the evolution of our DNA. Those energy fields have been around forever. It's not something new. Now, I believe that is probably the best place to look for the reason why this dumbed-down species that had very little intellect, very little self-knowledge or understanding its place in the universe. They were very animal-like. Those early humans were pretty much animals. Homo erectus kind of, ape-like creatures, I suppose, with a little bit more intelligence, and they walked more upright, so they were more useful. They could carry heavier loads, although they didn't have to carry heavier loads because they had levitation devices. So I think it's really the answer to that. The reason why we evolved is that the moment that Adam was given Eve as a partner, and that's where we went as a species from 22 chromosomes, and that number 22 is very important. Number 22 is a very important number that I'll deal with in our new book that I'm working on with Willem de Swart called Secret Numbers of God. 22 is a very important number, but I'm not going to elaborate on that now. We had 22 pairs of chromosomes, and then we were given a 23rd, which is the sex chromosome, the Y and the X chromosome. And then Eve was created out of Adam's rib. Well, the reason that happened is because they wanted to get to the DNA, and the closest part of DNA in your body is the closest is the rib. It's just skin deep. So they cut it out, took the bone marrow out, got the DNA out, reformulated the thing, cloned the female species, and they put them into this garden to see if they could get on and actually procreate. And guess what? They did. And that's when the trouble started. And because when the species could procreate on its own and suddenly, go forth and multiply, suddenly that changed everything. That changed everything. And that is a very important little bit of, wisdom from the Bible. When Noah tells, after the flood, when God tells Noah, go forth and multiply, that was not a blessing, that was a curse, because they needed people to multiply so they could, mine more gold.
So your book is Slave Species of God, and your newest book, I believe, is called Temples of the African Gods. Both are very extraordinary books filled with fabulous information, and if you'd like more information about that, you can go to Michael's website, ZuluPlanet.com. There's a link on my website, as well as the radio homepage on Achieve. So, Michael, in closing, what I usually like to ask my guests is, what is your message bringing forth this information and affecting people's consciousness with your work and your research? What is your hope that will happen for humankind?
My absolute hope is actually becoming a reality on a daily basis, is the fact that there is a huge, rapid global explosion in human consciousness. It's got absolutely nothing to do, we can do nothing about it. It is the stuff that comes to us from space, from the galactic center. It drives our genetic growth and the growth of consciousness and our evolutionary state as a being, understanding our place in the cosmos and realizing that we have a much bigger universal community that we belong to, and we're not this silly little lost species on a planet called Earth. And just embrace this information, embrace this knowledge, and move into a higher vibrational frequency that you realize that we are all one. Division is the myth that we've been sold. Division is the lie and the seed of separation that we've been sold. We're all one. We're all part of the divine creator.
Michael Tallinger, everybody. I'm Hillary Raimo. Thank you for joining me for this past hour.